crossings upgrades, and replacement of levers in signal boxes with slightly more sophisticated devices. Now, not only does he work at Victoria, he's also married to Victoria, but that's a lady rather than a station. And he's got 2 children, Stephen and Louise. And his hobby apparently is waveboarding and noughts and crosses, or no, actually it's not noughts and crosses, what it's boxes and dots. So hopefully by the end of this talk, I'll know what he's talking about. So I've promised to say a few words about things which are going to happen in the near and not so near future. On the 20th of October, there will be the next real event, as in people being here at One Birdcage Walk. And that's a seminar on refocusing our railway. I think that's going to be exciting. It's going to have lots of engineers, but also historians talking about the future, which is very strange for historians. And hopefully we'll have a technical tour in James's period in spring. That will be a UK-based tour. And also there is a crack event. Now, I don't know what the crack event is all about, but it's probably about fatigue and similar things on trains and tracks. And Graham Neal, who is here, is actually putting that together. I think it's a topic of relative importance. And I think that's probably it. Most importantly, please switch off your mobile phones, and those people remotely, please mute your computers. And finally, James will be very happy to provide answers at the end, particularly on boxes and dots. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Felix. And do a bit of sound check there as well. Okay, so yeah, I'm not the only one that's nervous. It's the first hybrid event that the IMechE has hosted. So there's a few technicians and other people in the room who are hoping that the technology will work for them. So please do bear with us if things don't go as planned, but so far, so good. Right, so what I'm hoping now is that I'll be sharing the screen that is going to be my presentation. So for the people in the room, we're going to be getting that up as well. And the hope is that people who are online can also see it. So when we do Q&A, for those people who are virtual, we're going to be doing the hands up away. So you put your hands up if you want to ask a question. So can you put your hands up if what you can see on the screen now is a big yellow sign which says dots and boxes? Are there people putting their hands up? No, we can't see. No, right, there's the first bit, okay. Sorry, we didn't rehearse this bit, by the way. I've just made this up. Excellent, right. Thank you very much for those of you who put your hands up. That means you can see it and also you can hear it. Excellent, right, I shall start. In theory, I should also be able to control the presentation now by clicking that. Excellent, right, thank you. So I skipped the intro bit because Felix did a great job of doing that for me. So thank you very much, Felix. What the journey I'm going to be taking you on today, which is where the transport industry, so it is a journey. 3 parts to it. A quick introduction, so a very short introduction about a bit of background on myself. Second one, the more chunky one. How did I get here? Why do I deserve to be up here talking to you, and what do I know? And then the final part is really where I sum up in terms of, so what? And so what does that mean for you as an individual, for you as an engineer, or for you as part of an organization in the railway industry? So that's the journey I hope to take you on. Hopefully it feels like it by the time we're finished, and I shall now make a start on it. So who am I? Yeah, that's good. As Felix said, head of design in Network Rail, and he did explore a bit about what are the kind of things I get involved with. But if you were to ask me what type of engineer I feel like in the rail industry, I'd say I feel more like a traction and rolling stock engineer, a train engineer. I don't feel like a signal or a track engineer. So why is that? And that's what I hope to kind of share with you today in terms of the things that kind of turn me into who I am, but also why I feel like that. And we'll revisit at the end, and hopefully when we get there, you'll appreciate a bit more about what I'm talking about. So, continuing on that introduction, career path. Started in Grimsby in the UK. I then, quickly after that, went and grew up a bit in South Africa. So, appreciate it's a bit far back to go, in terms of who I am and what shaped me. So I won't kind of go this far back from here on. But just to clarify, I'm the little one. And that's not Grimsby. That's Cape Town. Too much sun there. I then returned to the UK, where I was 12 and a half, 13. Went and lived in Newcastle, so hence the strong Geordie accent, you can tell, where I went to school all the way through to my A-levels in the northeast. I then went to Sheffield, which Felix has already shared with you, where I studied mechanical engineering. So did the standard A-levels in that kind of lead you to becoming, wanting to do engineering at university, chose mechanical and went to Sheffield for that privilege. Between years 1 and 2, I popped into a train maintenance depot in the area, Heaton Depot. I'll talk a bit more about that later, but that's when I first stumbled across the railway industry. I then graduated from university and carried on in the rail industry by becoming a graduate engineering management trainee, a graduate trainee and engineering trainee under what was British Rail. And those people in the photo over there are some of the people who joined at the same time as me. About half of them are still in the industry. And I noticed that there's a couple of people online today watching that. A third are still in the UK rail industry. So some people have actually migrated to other parts of the world, but continued in their journey in the rail industry. The other thing to note from a career background perspective in a very high level is that the first third of it was as part of traction and runner stock organisation, so dealing with trains. And I will explore this a bit in more detail in a moment. But the second 2/3 have been with infrastructure organisations with a bit of traction and runner stock in the middle or in between. So that was a quick version of who I am. What I'm going to do is now focus on 2 key areas on that journey, or 2 key aspects of that journey that's got me to where I am here today. The first part is, what were the drivers or catalysts for change that I experienced in terms of becoming, going from what was the beginning of the railway career to where I am today? And that's important in terms of how it affects everybody, not just me. And then also some quite memorable moments in that career where that experience made me think differently about something. Some of them are conversations, some of them are kind of big events. But there are times that when I've looked back in preparing for this, I've realized they've been almost like kind of made me had a bit of a shift in terms of how I see the world. Okay. So coming towards the end of the introduction, what do I know? So first thing I was going to say for this was, what I've learned is that the railway is a system. But when I hear myself say that, it's becoming a bit of a cliche. And so I thought, well, why do I think that's important? And one of the things I kind of realized was, when people do talk about the railway as a system, they focus on the technical stuff. They focus on the engineering. They focus on, what makes, interfaces and engineering things from a system perspective. But what I think is missing is the people bit. It's actually how the people bring the engineering together. Engineering, the laws of physics don't change if you're in a different industry. If you're in the rail industry, the aerospace industry, they all have the same laws of physics. What makes the difference when you're actually able to kind of understand more about the system that we're in is the people within it. I'm still talking about engineering. I'm talking about engineers. But for me, that's what I kind of realized was a key aspect of what made it different for me in terms of when I say the railway is a system. I'm not thinking necessarily about the technical stuff. I'm thinking more about the people. So what I'll be covering today, when I'm kind of going through the journey that we're on, a lot of people stuff, but I have included a bit of techie stuff for those of you who are kind of like a bit of techie stuff as well. Okay, so moving on. So why have I called it dots and boxes? So when I was trying to work out how to inspire you or give you something that you take away and you remember, I recognize there'll be visual people in the room and there'll be verbal people in the room. So I'm going to be telling you a story, but I also wanted to try and work out how to kind of make it a picture. And that's when I remembered, in the context of, meeting new people, learning new things, it's a bit like the game that is called dots and boxes. So here's a bit of a kind of video demo for those of you who've never been bored on holiday somewhere and had to resort to kind of trying to work out how to occupy yourselves while you've only got a piece of paper and 2 or 3 pens to share amongst you. The objective is to join the dots and own as many boxes as possible. So for me, joining the dots is about meeting people and learning things outside your usual area of knowledge, your usual area of expertise. When you complete the box, you really get to know what's inside. You can feel the difference. You understand it. It's not just about the principles of how it works. It's not the theory. It's actually, you own it a bit more emotionally, as well as actually understanding the engineering behind it as well. So that's why it's called dots and boxes. And then I started kind of thinking about it in terms of having concluded the introduction, where did the boxes come from? So why was I thinking about things as boxes? And as I started to think about this, I realized it's something that we often use in engineering. There's 2 sides to it though. A box can provide clarity, defining clear scope, what fits within that box. But also it can be perceived as limiting, if you're not thinking outside the box. So that's why, as an area in terms of why I chose it, I thought actually that's quite relevant for here, because it is important to understand what's in your box, but also how do you kind of represent looking outside that box. And one of my first lectures in the first year at university that I remember was fluid dynamics. We're talking about how to understand what makes an airplane go up. So you've got the aerofoil shape, the wing, and we started talking about the principles behind it. But what I remember really being confused by initially was the instructor, well, the kind of lecturer saying, the first thing you do, put a box around it, define your control volume. And I thought, okay, right. And then we got into some of the laws of physics in terms of, the law of conservation of energy. Total energy of an isolated system remains constant. You can't destroy it or create it. So what goes in the box must come out of the box. So the theory here is that the air at the top has further to go, but it's still got to come out the same side, so it goes out faster. Higher speed, lower pressure above the wing, high pressure below the wing goes up. But I'm not here to talk about aerodynamics. It was just something that stuck for me when I was at university already as an engineer. They're introducing you to the concept of thinking within boxes. That then gets more complicated as you bring computers into the world and you bring the power of computing into it. So this is my first computational fluid dynamics experiment that we did. What we've got here is a simple box, 1 by 1 by 1, and the top line is actually traveling at 1 meter per second. And the fluid inside is spinning around as a result. So you're bringing friction and pressure and things to it. But what you've got here is lots of little boxes that the computer's doing the calculations on in terms of what does that environment look like. But then ultimately you've got the big box around it. Very simple kind of engineering theory that says basics of computational fluid dynamics. You then extend it to more complex boxes and you start doing things like this. And you get into the realms of really quite important kind of things for us to be working on as engineers. But when you know one box, you start adding other boxes to it, and ultimately you create your system. Join all the boxes together, and in this case, you get an engine. I'm not going to talk about engines. What I was trying to do was just to kind of help you to understand how I've been thinking about this in terms of the railway as a system is it's a bit like that in terms of all those different boxes. That's the techie part. And like I say, it's almost like a habit for an engineer to use that to help them to kind of learn, to develop, make their own box work as effectively as it can, but then they expand on that and trying to kind of enable it to work with the other boxes within the system. How did I get here? So we now moved on to the bulk of what I was going to talk to you about today. So where did my traction rolling stock boxes come from? So I'll call them TNRs from here on, because it makes it easier for me. And hopefully easy for you as well. So I had this summer placement. My motivation wasn't because I was interested in the railway. Got to put my hand up to that one. It was because the university I was at had a close affiliation with the railway industry, British Rail. And in order to graduate, I had to at least done one summer placement. And on the notice board came an opportunity to go and do summer placements with British Rail, and there was one near me in Heaton, which is in Newcastle. So hence I got there. So wasn't personal kind of career driver. It was fate, luck, whatever you might call it. But at that time, it was the start of my journey into the railway industry. When I graduated, decided I wanted to carry on doing that. So here we've got some of my graduate colleagues that I mentioned earlier, and some of them might be embarrassed with what they, how they've kind of grown up. But also my first project. So when we kind of come out of our induction school, the first project was about, the research centre in Derby were looking for a bunch of graduates, people to basically kind of help them with what they're doing. And the research was looking at leaf fall. And I got introduced to leaf film and the concept of the fact that leaves have a real actual impact on trains and their ability to stop in the autumn season. Looking back on that now, I didn't realize the significance of it. The first thing I actually start getting involved with is the interfaces between track and rail, TNRS and rail. But actually, when I'd finished doing that work, which was obviously limited by the fact that it was only during autumn, I then went off and spent actually the rest of my time in the traction rolling stock side at Neville Hill Depot in Leeds, which is what this is a photo of. And those are some of the vehicles, what they look like in those days. Obviously, they've gone through a number of facelifts and changes, but those are definitely photos from the time when I was there. And how did I get a drone shot in those days? Well, actually, I was in a lighting tower because that was part of my plant placement. And going up to the top of the lighting tower and making sure everything was okay was part of it. And I took the opportunity to take a photo from the top, which I was quite proud of. So first placement was there and basically started to learn more about these things. So each of the boxes that I was working with and I'd say playing with, but no, it was a bit more serious than that. From daily examination of those things that go into one of those, and all the way from regular level 4 daily maintenance servicing, all the way to level 5 overhaul and major component replacement. So that's where I kind of really got my hands dirty and started to understand a bit more about traction rolling stock engineering and really and what really made me feel like I do today in terms of being a traction rolling stock engineer. Also, for those of you who are familiar with the depot in Leeds, there's 2 boxes in one. There are effectively 2 types of train services operated from that depot, intercity type and regional railways type, or regional urban types. So there are 2 businesses, and that's what happened when I was there. I flitted about a bit in the 8 years that I was there and worked for both businesses in various kind of different roles. So learning more about multiple units, electric and diesel ones, as well as the high-speed ones, with a sprinkling of people working, shift management, team management, and ultimately ended my time there as the depot manager in 2000. Now, one thing I forgot to actually mention, that was also kind of one of those drivers and catalysts for change. When I joined as a graduate, went through the process of being accepted and then started on my induction program. About 4 weeks in, it was announced that British Rail would be privatised. So didn't know what that meant, really, because I didn't really live the railway industry as much that time, so didn't know what to worry about, so kind of just went with it. But looking back now, recognise that was quite a pivotal moment in the industry's timeline, just when I was starting as a graduate. And we'll come back to that in a moment. So how did I get out and reaching into the track box? Now, I call it a track box on the basis of it's easy to use that instead of infrastructure, because infrastructure is more than just track. There's civil works, there's electrifications, there's signals. But for the purposes of what we're talking about today, how did I get involved in the world that is what people might see, a track as being the infrastructure side of things? So this is where it happened, where there was a bit of personal motivation. So had spent 8 years at that depot and thought I knew that box really well. I know the railway. I've been there for 8 years, had my hands inside various gearboxes and crankcases and things. I know what it's all about. So let's try something different. I applied for a role in York. There's a reason for that. My wife and I both come from the northeast. So when we lived in Leeds, the family rule was no further south than Leeds. Made traveling easier. So that was kind of given. So go to York, it's just along, yeah, same distance up, but just a little bit along. So I went for a planning role in York. Thought, yes, there's a bit of a stretch in terms of some of my current skills, but no, it's I wouldn't call it baby steps, but still a small step to be able to transition across to work for another company. However, I didn't get that job, but what happened was somebody else spotted that I could do something in their world that was like train maintenance, but was maintaining the infrastructure. So I didn't spot this. It was something that I wasn't looking for. Somebody else recognized it and said, actually, don't think you're any good at that, but I think you're really good at that. And that was about working for that company. So there's an element of being brave, and I'll kind of explain a bit more about why you would look like that. What do I know about track, for a start? My world is very much kind of traction rolling stock and depot, and nothing goes above 5 miles an hour. Also, just to kind of get a bit closer here, geography, map, Newcastle, Leeds, where I was living, Peterborough is where they wanted me to go. And that purple line was going to be my new depot. East Coast Main Line, first 100 miles out of it was mine to be maintaining. So, a lot of things to kind of be thinking about there in terms of being brave. Final thing, the company at that time, Railtrack, was called the Infrastructure Controller, and was often perceived as being a bit of a controller. So, as you can tell, a lot of things part of the equation in terms of whether to do the job or not, but I went for it. I thought, no, let's go and have a look. They seem to think I'll be able to do it. Let's go and see what that looks like. So, my new boxes became 2 maintenance delivery units, Hitchin and Peterborough. Peterborough being where I currently live, because we then had to move to Peterborough, which, yes, you're right, is south of Leeds. But it was a compelling argument. They're a big company. It's like going south to go north. We're still there. But what happened? When I got there, actually realized very similar. People, railway people, very like-minded in their attitude, and different types of maintenance activities, but principles very similar. Inspection, maintenance periodicities, even do ultrasonic testing, like we did in axles and bearings, they do run the track all the time. So actually there was a lot of things that I could get to understand. Got to admit, it was a bit different in terms of the maintenance at that time was being carried out by a contractor, so it was very much a contract management kind of role. But I had a team of engineers for each of those main disciplines, so people actually I got to know really well, and this is where that dots bit comes in. It's about the kind of the conversations that we have with these people. And what I really liked about working in the infrastructure side, or the truck side, it's usually where you left it. Whereas if you're trying to maintain trains, sometimes they don't come back the next day because they're off at another depot. So I really loved that kind of change in terms of we're not actually chasing things around the country as well. Anyway, and there is also another aspect. I didn't leave my trucks and running the stock box really, because every now and then, sometimes the system didn't quite work. And we might have a dewirement or some kind of interface might not work as well as it should be. And this is where I started to kind of get a real understanding of the technical conversation only seems to happen when things like this happen. When everything's working okay, everyone seems to think their world is their box, just focus on your box, don't worry about the rest of it, it'll sort itself out. It doesn't, as we kind of learned over the years. But yes, this is where I started to become able to talk about the train to my track engineers, my overhead line engineers, and my signal engineers, and they started to realize, okay, I know something a bit different to what they do, and that's where those conversations started to kind of get a real feeling for how the system performs and works. So what I want to do now is share with you, while I was in that role, 3 particular catalysts for change that really kind of nailed it for me, I suppose, is the one way to describe it, in terms of becoming somebody who starts to reach outside that box and then fill it, reach outside of it and then fill it in and really kind of know it. The first one is very tragic. That one. It happened 3 weeks after I started in my job. That to me was almost a wobble moment, shall we say, in terms of, oh my God, what have I done? And a very natural thing to kind of think in terms of, what have I let myself into? To give you a flavour of what happened on the day, I was in Huntingdon, we were on the track. I was with my signal engineer and my track engineer. We were doing asset inspections. So we're out and about on the day already. And the pager went off. Pagers, you remember those? Quickest way to get messages across, a broad kind of communication. Simple message, hitch and derailment, derailment, Hatfield curves. Track engineer understood the significance of it. I didn't. We were there on site within about 2 hours when the emergency services were unfortunately still doing their thing. And that's where kind of shock and all kind of hit, I suppose. However, the guys I was with, they were on it in terms of understanding what they needed to do in order to be able to help, and help me to kind of make sure I wasn't a loose, a missing bolt or something like that, just somebody who just didn't know what to do. So they were, as people, they were really helpful for me. And I remember that night when I was going to actually cover the first shift for the recovery of the actual incident site, lots of things went through my mind. What have I let myself in for? How do I deal with this? Is it too late to change my mind about taking the job on? In fact, my line manager from the previous role at Neville Hill did phone me up and ask me if I was okay, which in itself was another great thing. And he did say, if you want to come back, just say. And I said, no, I'm fine, I'm good, I can do this. My involvement in that, post that, it wasn't all the techie stuff. I will kind of come to that in a moment, later on. Mine was all about recovery of service, because that's what my role was all about. It was a very intense few months. Met a lot of people very quickly, and unfortunately, because of the nature of the incident, it's a very, very, very sad event to have to kind of had in the industry. But from a kind of a trigger point, a huge catalyst for change in terms of how the industry works together in what we're doing in terms of that particular interface. But like I say, I'll kind of cover that in a bit more detail in a moment. The second, so I'll come back in a minute. The second experience I had while working on the infrastructure was a conversation I had with my track engineer in the office on a summer's day. Yes, because he'd been out and he wasn't moaning about the weather. What he was moaning about, and I'll use the word, he said, okay, make sure we don't get people there. He said to me, coming in a bit of an agitated state, having been out looking at his track, he says, when you maintain your wheels, do you work to the same ridiculous limits as we do? So there were my wheels for a start, and then ridiculous limits. And I thought, right, okay, so where do I go with this? And so I said, I think so, but let me have a look. And I kind of went back to my wheel lathe experience. So Neville Hill had a wheel. Muted me. So just a request for the people in the virtual audience, could you not mute me? That'd be really helpful. If you don't like what I'm saying, just leave. That's an option. Yeah, so that's what he said, ridiculous tolerances. And his question was genuine. He didn't know. And when he asked me, I immediately didn't know without having to go and have a look. But when I did have a look into it, the answer was yes. They're actually exactly the same. And for me, that was when kind of the penny dropped in terms of the experience I had in terms of managing wheel sets. I didn't realize the track engineer had the same kind of challenges in terms of what they were working towards in terms of how they were managing their wear. And this is all about kind of side wear and various other forms of wear at that interface. And for both of us, it worked better because he then felt a bit more kind of understanding of what they do on a traction running stock side compared to what he does as a track engineer. He felt it was just him battling against the rest of the world, but in reality, actually, we're trying to do it together. The second one, oh, so the third one, so there's three things, yeah. The third one, track engineer again. So this is one of the interesting things. I thought, I got on really well with that track engineer. Why is that? And actually, when you look at engineers who are track engineers, that's where most of the mechanical engineers actually tend to be in an infrastructure company. That there's a real kind of transferability in that. But we were talking again one day, and this time I was out with him on track, and a long train went past with lots of vehicles attached to it, so you'll know what type of train I'm talking about. And as one of the vehicles went past, it was banging repeatedly because one of the wheels had a significant defect. So I'm trying to be as polite as possible as I can there. But basically, his attitude was, see what we have to deal with. Your train's breaking rails, I think was his words at the time. So I said, okay, I get that, because I do remember, maintaining and looking at wheels and looking at damage. Sometimes it's quite difficult to kind of understand what the impact of that damage is. And I keep saying that, impact and all this kind of stuff. So I said, well, okay, so what do we do about it? So he said, oh, it's simple, you just call it in. And then this is the part of the third bit. So call it into the maintenance control. Train's just gone past me, where are you? Actually, I don't know. Where are we? Milepost X and so. Right, train's just gone past me. Which one was it? I don't know. It went north. And then you go, okay, right, I can probably find that on the system. Yes, there it is. Which side was it? Which wheel was it? I don't know. It just went past. There's probably 100 wheels on it, and I don't know which one it was. And that's where kind of I realized, okay, so if somebody given me that message at the depot, that train's got a wheel somewhere that's not right, yeah, I'm not going to spend too much time trying to, intensely trying to find it. It's something that actually, from a kind of a knowing who to talk to perspective in the industry, those are some of the barriers that were there at that time. I did ask him about the new wheel impact load detection systems that were, being talked about. And actually, they did have one in the area, but it wasn't commissioned yet. So it was very much at the advent of that time when wild systems were being put in place by the infrastructure controller. And we'll come to that in a moment. So again, that made me think about things differently, because I remember when I was at the depot and we were dealing with making sure that we had our trains operating on the railway, we had a certain level of availability, we needed timetables to run, so the passenger needed to have a service. And when you got a report of a wheel defect, go and have a look at it. I would have some of my supervisors come back to me and say, it'll be okay, it'll do another. They were thinking about it in terms of, is it safe to operate? Will it actually come back? And does it kind of meet what we need from a traction running stock perspective? Never did I think about it in terms of what the track engineer's grief would be as a result of me sending that train out or the supervisor saying that train's good to go. And that's where I started to kind of really understand it, because we often talk about it in terms of defective wheels cause rail breaks, but actually there's a lower level stuff. There's cracks in the rail normally. There's naturally cracks in the rail. They propagate, they grow through normal use. What wheels that are maintained where you've got defects in them causes is the track engineer to all of a sudden have lots of defects that he needs to manage in this set period of time, 10 weeks, 3 weeks, and he's got to then plan renewal of that. Causes his world to be quite painful. As a depot manager, I never saw that, never understood that, and so never really thought about it like that when I was busy managing my part of that system. So like I say, a lot of these are kind of almost like kind of penny dropping moments and conversations that I really, when I look back, think, oh yeah, that made me think differently about it. I'm just trying to remember what's next. Oh yeah, so I got a bit of a reputation in the 18 months that I was there as being the track engineer, or the traction rolling stock engineer, who everybody started coming to and saying, how do I deal with this train? What happens with this train? How does that work? And actually started to join dots, other people's dots. So my track engineers got to understand what the wheel lathe operators down at Bounds Green were having to deal with, or how they were kind of working on that. And we also kind of got the signal engineers also talking to some of my traction runners. So I was making connections for other people to allow them to understand a bit more about each other's worlds. But I kept on asking, I said, I'm doing this in what was then called the London North East Zone. Who does it elsewhere in rail track? And my route colleague said, well, we don't know, but don't go anyway. We like you, what you're doing. So I kind of thought, right, and I kept on asking it for 2 or 3 months, I think. And then one day, I came here. That's the main lecture theatre in IMechE, Birdcage Walk. So this is where some of the benefit that I'm thinking that the IMechE does bring is networking people together, brings people together. And the reason I got quite excited was there was somebody who was presenting at the conference that I went to, who was the head of traction rolling stock in Railtrack, talking about the wheel-rail interface. I thought, that's the person I've been looking for. But I had to come here to find that person. And then I got in touch with them. It was Sylvia Cherba, who I spoke to at that time. And when I said to her, who does this in Railtrack? She says, nobody, but do you want to? And so that's when kind of that as a motivation, that was where actually, no, I think this is something that I'm really passionate about and want to try and fix. So yeah, I'll give that a go. Where was the office located? London. A bit further south again. But we stayed in Peterborough. Yeah, it's commutable. So that was a less of a difficult conversation. So yeah, and that's when I really got to kind of do something that I was driving myself to do, which was about joining dots by having what effectively was a small team of people who understood traction rolling stock in an infrastructure company. And I started off with one or two, well, it was me initially, and gradually built it up to where we had one in each of the routes and sometimes two. And their objective, and this is where it's kind of challenging sometimes, their objective was to have technical conversations and avoid commercial conversations. So when you're dealing with things that are, causing problems because an interface didn't work, usually there's delay involved, or there's some kind of claim to be made. So a lot of people within the, within the two organizations are keen for somebody to come up with a conclusion as to what the cause of that fault was, so that then go and claim the money back from them. And that was that was almost kind of a different type of eye-opener in terms of you're trying to have a proper engineering conversation here to understand it, but you're being stifled by everybody wanting you to kind of come to a conclusion so that they can get their money back. Or they're not actually interested in trying to solve it long term. They just want to settle that particular incident. And so we did spend a lot of time trying to unlock that so that people were more focused on actually understanding what the problem was and then fixing it longer term and actually then avoiding the problem and improving things. And there was three catalysts, well, so there's a number of catalysts for change again that happened as part of that journey. Now, I'm just looking at where we are in terms of time. Okay, no, good. So two examples up in Scotland that I wanted to share with you because this flips it. This is where the track is causing problems with the train. So what we've got here, the first example, was an incident that me and my team got involved with trying to understand, which was at Rutherglen, a station in Scotland, but as you can see from the photo, very sharp bend. Check rail on it, and often got a lot of sideway problems on the track. Track engineer does what a track engineer does. Over a period of time, gets to a point where they transpose the rails, swap them around. So you're not getting a new one in, you're just basically the unworn one where the inside of it is, is on the outside, becomes the one that is on the running edge and then is a fresh new profile. And it can now wear all it wants to take it to its limits. When they did that, the train operator, for a couple of vehicles in their fleet which ran on that route regularly, ran out of wheels in 4 weeks because they were having flange thickness issues very quickly. Basically, they were being ground to nothing because this fresh new profile that had just been put in obviously was dealing with wheels that had a profile that was more like the old one, the worn one. So what was underpinning that is obviously, there was the lubricators weren't necessarily working in the area. There was a number of things that contributed to it. So we spent a lot of time helping. The hardest part was finding out what was happening. The train operator knew that it was two trains, had to track the actual route and then find out where that location was, where something had changed. So again, it's that whole kind of maintaining the systems in the blinkers of your own kind of box, but you don't realize the consequences of your change sometimes. Same thing happened in Glasgow Tunnels. Glasgow Canal Tunnels. So the reason I kind of emphasize that, tunnels under the canal, and this is before they did all the work in 2015-16 to renew it, which is what this work is, but they were quite wet environments. And so the drainage engineer decided he wanted to fix that. So he fixed all the drains, stopped the leaking, and then the train started running out of wheels again because the rails that were previously wet were nice and slippery for going around because they were damp. Take away that, you're then relying on the lubricators, the 12 of them that you got in those tunnels, but they weren't working really well because nobody had identified that they weren't working because the water was doing the same job to some extent. So again, it's kind of that innocence of doing the right thing, but not really understanding the consequences of it, or of the impact of what you're doing before realizing when somebody comes and tells you after the event. So those were the kind of things that that team really got stuck into to understand what was going on and having those technical conversations so you could find those things. I've summarized them very quickly, but some of them did take weeks and months to actually kind of bottom down in terms of what was going on. I did promise to get a bit techie in terms of wheel impact load systems. So what I wanted to do was just share with you what's going on in now Network Rail, so not Railtrack. So this is current stuff in terms of what wheel impact load detection looks like. So we have a WILE system. What does it do? It records all this information, and I won't read it in too much detail because you can look at it afterwards or read it yourself. But it also has a real-time communication capability. So it triggers when exceedance in wheel loadings happen. Now, when it was first put in place, perceived as a bit of a Big Brother thing, it's almost like kind of trying to stop us running trains was the feeling I think we would have from a train operator perspective. But actually, that's now kind of changed, where the information is better, I would say, as in it's more reliable. But actually, now we're starting to have some of the operators of trains are now having a proactive way of managing their wheels using this type of information. So again, an indication of how good intentions initially aren't perceived as that, but over time do become beneficial. So the current system is a what's unfortunately called gotcha. It superseded wheel checks, which was the previous version of it, but this one's based on optical fibers, which are basically measuring the strain in the rail as the weight goes over it. The previous version was bonded wire gauging. So this one is the new one that has these basic components and are fitted in numerous locations around the country. And the funding for them comes from the benefits that it has in terms of reducing rail breaks, ultimately. But actually, the real big benefit is my track engineers not chasing as many defects as he used to, because they're the ones that don't turn into rail breaks. He's managed to stop them beforehand, and he's done them in a controlled fashion, in a way that is sustainable, as opposed to having to be reactionary all the time. Okay, right. I am now conscious of time. So there is one more thing I wanted to kind of cover in terms of that same system, designed for impact loading, but also helps to understand when trains are unevenly loaded. So we have, a lot of containers that we send around the network. A combination of systems can come together to help us to understand when some of those vehicles are potentially at risk of derailment because they're a bit heavy loaded at the back or sideways on. And some of these pictures are examples of incidents that have come through as part of RAID reports, which show how vehicles, the loading of them isn't as balanced or as even as you'd hope it would be when it's fitted to a train. And so this system allows you to trend the data so that you can then go and talk to the train operator and maybe even look at the site where these are loaded to understand what kind of controls they've got in place to make sure that they are fixed if there is an issue to be fixed. For example, filling up hoppers. If you've got a blocked dropper, it'll not fill up that box all the time on a regular basis with the right amount of material, and therefore it becomes uneven. Anyway, and the other thing to definitely recognise is that not only does track measure trains, but trains measure track. Network Rail has its own, but actually every new train that brings onto the network has the capability of monitoring itself, and inherently is also monitoring the nature of the infrastructure. And hence, something that I'm not involved with, but for me is kind of like a great thing to be going in terms of a direction. It's about kind of having what is termed intelligent infrastructure, but it's basically using that data to help you to spot that stuff before it turns into becoming a problem. Okay. I was going to mention Hatfield, but only in the context of it being an incident that prompted an industry investigation. So as a catalyst, it created a number of things, raised awareness in what is termed, rolling contact fatigue, RCF. The definition of rolling contact fatigue is It's a failure or material removal driven by crack propagation caused by the near surface alternating stress field. Not just a railway thing. It's in any kind of industry, bearings and wherever you've got steel on steel. But for us as an industry, we've had to learn a lot since the incident. But the people that, actually there are people in this room who've been involved in helping to understand more about what happened, what were the contributing factors to it, and how do we manage that interface more effectively. To the point of where I've got a couple of quick slides, which kind of, for me, this is from 2001, a Vehicle Track System Interface Committee report, which talks about there's three modes of it. It also describes how some of it's based on track activity in terms of alignment, some of it's based on vehicle conditions, suspension, profile. So for me, that's kind of really understanding what it's like going on at the interface. And these are the people whose box is really, really small, 50p small. And I think I heard the terminology. They're very enthusiastic about it. It's almost like they're crack addicts. You know? I got you. You're still awake. That's good. That's good. And then to take it to the next level, you start working out how to manage it, and you start working at different wheel profiles and maintenance regimes that help prevent it. It's a continuing thing that we as an industry are having to deal with. And if you want to know more, buy the book. I've got one, and I can tell you who wrote it, etc. Like I say, some of the people in the room, some people on the call, but yeah, there's a whole book on it that can help you to digest that, because I'm not here to kind of get into the technical details of the wheel rail interface. It would probably be a 3-day conference, I think, if we did that. Yeah, so that's what things were like at that time. So the final kind of thing I wanted to kind of share with you was a warning: box comfort. So this is the bit where when you know your box really well, you start to get a bit kind of comfortable with it, maybe a bit arrogant or a bit kind of pointed. And that's what started to happen to me, but I didn't realize it. But somebody helped me spot that when I started to tell a bit more about what was going on with his team. So I started to get invited to go to organizations and say, tell us about these rail vehicle interface engineers. What do they do? How can they help us in terms of what we're doing? And I actually went to a IMechE Rail Division Center. It was the Southwest one. And I was giving them a presentation on what that team does. And there was a particular message I was trying to get across to the TNRS engineers in the room. Having worked in Network Rail, now Rail Track, now Network Rail, and understanding why they do what they do and what drives some of those behaviors and why it behaves like it does, I started to try to describe it in terms of, think of it like a box, and if the train fits in the box, understand the control volume, and you understand whether they're physical, electrical, or magnetic, and just work within that box. I was trying to kind of maybe oversimplify it, but I was just trying to get across the point, understanding that box is the important thing. And when we got to the Q&A, a learned gentleman in the crowd said, in the audience said, it's not a question, just that when I was at school, we were taught to think outside the box. It just floored me. I had no answer. I thought, yeah, no, good point. You've reminded me that I'm probably a bit comfortable in my box, think I know the answer to everything. Thank you. On reflection, obviously I didn't thank him in the day, but on reflection, I'm thinking, yeah, no, thank you for that. You've helped me realize I've got a bit too comfortable in my box, and I need to recognize some of the other stuff that goes on around it. And even that whole kind of concept, it's still difficult to understand what that box looks like. Every new train introducer will know that if you're trying to introduce your train into the infrastructure, defining that box on any kind of aspect is difficult to do. So please don't get me wrong, I don't think it's that simple. Okay, so bringing all the boxes together, my dream job came along. And this is where the final kind of thing, I suppose, is recognizing when the opportunity almost passes you by. Because this was a role that I wasn't looking for, didn't know it existed, and saw it. And I suppose it's like when you kind of, you see something that piques your interest, whether it be kind of a car or a house, it's got all the things that you want as part of your kind of, the thing that you think is the answer to everything that you're looking for in terms of what you like. But then when you see it, you've got two choices. One is, oh, that's interesting, and carry on, or where can I get one of those? So when this role was first talked about, And it was at a time, I think 2010, and it was a time when interoperability and European legislation was changing to the point of where Network Rail couldn't avoid interoperability anymore. And I can legitimately say that because that's what they accepted. That's why they made the decisions that they made. They recognized that the ability to kind of say, no, it's not applicable in terms of what we're doing, in terms of our infrastructure development. They recognized, actually, no, they need to do something different. And one of those things was to create a certification body that helped them to understand a bit more about what interoperability meant. It was originally kind of born from the concept of having a single industry designated body in the UK. That didn't ever happen, but the idea stuck, and I got the opportunity to create that organization and spend 7 years doing it. That's the longest I've been in the same job. And the reason was it brought together traction and stock engineering, infrastructure engineering, and what I put initially as non-engineering stuff, but actually good customer service is what they taught me as well, was an engineering trait. You know, any good engineer needs to kind of have a good understanding as to what good customer service looks like as well, to bring all those boxes together. And the thing I wanted to kind of just finish off on this particular piece was the types of people who could work as engineers in this organization were quite, I wouldn't say unique, but they needed to have quite a wealth of experience and knowledge of practicing different parts of what it takes to put the railway together, to build it, design it, to take care of it, and also dispose of it. So a lot of the really good conformance engineers were people who had a lot of experience. Didn't mean we didn't welcome graduates. We did welcome graduates and developing engineers. But what I also did was, after they'd been with us for 3 years or 4 years, I actively pushed them away. They'd learned a lot from us, but they'd kind of got into a bit of a box, and they needed to go and learn about something else and come back in 10 years' time when you've kind of reached out into lots of other different boxes, learned different things, and then you will kind of really kind of flourish into, if that's what you want to do in terms of your career path. But yeah, don't start in a place like that, because then you kind of be quite focused on what you're doing, and sometimes maybe get a bit box comfortable. And that's where kind of, that was me then starting to kind of drive people to do something differently based on what I could see that they needed. So it's that people thing again. And that concludes really why I think I'm a traction and stock engineer. Hopefully, having shared that with you, you appreciate, while I still work in the company that is Network Rail, I actually feel like a trained person. So, coming to the end now. So what? Bringing all those boxes together. So this little diagram is, I suppose, my career path. And the circles represent what I would call, the small ones, evolution. So bits of change, you know, that happen in between large circles, which are revolution. The first one being, you know, British Rail starts to get, you know, British Rail goes privatization. In the middle, we've got, you know, Railtrack becomes Network Rail for a number of reasons. And then towards the end, more recently, we've got Brexit and pandemic. And now we're actually stepping into Great British Railways. So from a career perspective, it's been interesting for me. Started just at the time a nationalized organization was going public, or private, sorry. Now it's the other end, where a very much private organization is going something akin to kind of being a bit nationalized. And I feel I've got a lot to give that, because there's lots of great things that I think I've learned in terms of the journey that I've been on, in terms of what are the good things that privatization did. But there are also things that I think we don't want to get into the habit of when we were just the one British Rail. So how are we going to be part of that then? So part of that will be driven by what our industry leaders think it should look like. So again, I have the opportunity to work in the company where Andrew Haynes is the chief exec, is one of those key features of what is now called the Great British Railway Transformation Team. And so I'm keen to understand what he thinks about what this looks like, because I didn't know Andrew before he started with us, but it seems he does have some experience of working the railway, and he's got some ideas for it as well. He's got his vision for rail reform. And so this is Andrew's vision. So it's not necessarily something that represents Great British Railway transformation. It's his view of it. Need to be kind of focused on. Need to be specific about that, because when I borrowed the video, that's what I need to make sure I got across. These are his words and his ideas, and I will let him tell you about them himself. Did we share the video audio? Okay, those people who are watching online, if you hear the sound, I'm going to ask them to put their hands up. So could you just make sure that the people put their hands up? Right, well, just stop share and reshare. I suggest you stop share and then reshare. Reshare. And then click that slider at the top. Up, that's it. What? Go up again. That slider, isn't it? You've got to do that. Okay. Oh, you said something about the sound cancelling, didn't it? On the. Yeah, okay. No, we did it earlier and it worked okay. Okay, try sound cancelling. Yes, that's it. Yeah, that's it. And they're turned on.
Change go to high definition speakers and share the computer stuff.
No, that's a different one, isn't it? So I'm trying not to take over here. Okay, right, slid across. So now pick the thing you want to share. Then relaunch. And minimize the box. Okay, so if people could just put their hand up that you can hear it when I press play.
But I've used 3 S's to describe my vision for rail reform: simplicity, sustainability, and separation. Simplicity first. We want a railway that is simpler, and that means being more agile, a railway which is less bound by contractual obligations and long-standing out-of-date customs and practices, but one which is adapted to increasing shifts of demand from our rail users. An ability to work together in true partnership between track and train and not being driven by contract. When we're at our best, we already do that. But all too often, we're bound by contractual procedures. Sustainability. Well, of course, that means many things. It means being affordable, but also a service people want to use. Being more user-friendly, embracing technology, and of course, ultimately and profoundly, putting the railway's green credentials centre stage. And the last S is about separation. And by that, I mean being clear on roles and responsibilities, separating the politics from the job of running a customer-focused railway. Yes, being relentlessly committed to delivering on the priorities established by ministers, but having sufficient separation to get on with the job we know we can do best.
Cool. That was all I wanted to share. So what did I take that? When I heard him say that, a couple of things struck a chord for me. Bringing track and train together, good. And also keeping it simple, being able to talk technical without getting contractual. So I'm thinking, great, some of the stuff, as principles at least, are starting to kind of come through in terms of what the future looks like. But we get to the so what. And the so what is what we need to be doing as individuals or as members of organizations or even as engineers as part of the IMechE. And that's about helping people to accelerate how they join those boxes effectively. That's what I'm kind of key to kind of focus on in terms of some of the things that I've experienced have been accelerated by, by being thrust upon me. But what I think we should try and work out how to do is how do we, as individuals, look for that opportunity to kind of reach outside of your box and do something different. Be brave, but don't stay too comfortable too long. As members of organizations, inspire or release your people. So the good people are the ones you don't want to lose. You want them to be better at it and just continue to do what they're doing. Actually, there's sometimes it might be appropriate to give them a bit of a nudge to help them to learn something different and go and really kind of extend that box that they know really well into the ones around them and more so. A difficult thing sometimes for an organization to do, but you play a part in it. And then finally, as a mechanical engineer and as part of the IMechE, collaborate with your professional colleagues or engineers from other disciplines, or maybe even think about being able to do their job. Thank you. So for Q&A, we'll stop the screen and we'll go open mic. So for the people who are online, if you could put your hands up if you've got a question that you want to ask verbally, great. Or if you haven't got audio or something like that, or a speak microphone, put something in the chat. But we'll also, so to help you to understand what I'm facing here, I'm looking at about 35 people who have been watching me in the room as well. So I'm going to go to them first with the roving mic, where we will be, well, Ivo will be kind of putting the mic near you so that you don't have to touch it.
I'll take it for each other. So just a quick one from me. From sort of the youngsters who've joined the industry, we've been very fortunate that we've not experienced some of the issues of the early 2000s with some of the unfortunate incidents. What advice would you give from someone who's lived through that to those of us who haven't experienced it, if that were to occur, attending that? What single piece of advice would you give?
Okay, so it's, yeah, okay, so if it were to happen to you, what to do? I'd say the first thing is don't panic. It's very much about kind of giving yourself the space to kind of absorb it, and then speak to the people around you. And there's a combination of things there. There's the colleagues at work in terms of, okay, what's going on? We as I suppose, as well, we're family or a collective. But also your own family, as in the people that kind of help you with that whole kind of, how do I deal with this thing? That's what I'd say. Don't panic.
How do you square the circle of Peter Hendy, Andrew Haynes, Grant Shapps and Keith Williams saying that under Great British Railways, they don't want engineers?
I hadn't heard that, is the first thought I'd say. But I also can't believe they would say that, because one of the things I know Andrew Haynes would say is Network Rail is not an engineering company, but it definitely needs engineers to do what it's doing. So for him to have said that, or for that to kind of come across, I don't think is his view, I suppose. The others, I wouldn't be able to comment. I don't know them as recently as that, but it's an interesting one. I don't think, certainly the conversations that we've been having as members of the Institute of Mechanical Engineers and the Railway Division Board, we're very keen to influence and be part of what Great British Railways looks like. And we want to do it in conjunction with all the other professional engineering institutions, because we think that engineering has a big part to play in it. So I'll be keeping an eye out for that quote and use the opportunity to kind of maybe try to question it. Have we got anybody with a hand up in the virtual area? No, Stan's quite out of hand. Anybody else got any questions? Bill.
Thank you. So James, that was very thought-provoking. Thank you. I was just reflecting on my experience of the difference in engineering culture between train operating companies and infrastructure managers, and perhaps freight operating companies even more so. And I'm intrigued when the engineering becomes completely disconnected from the commercial reality of securing a customer for the railway, which may touch on some of the comments earlier. You talked about connecting engineers, and you wisely talked about keeping the contracts out of the room. Do you have any reflections on how to connect engineers to the business of securing new revenue for the railway?
Yes, so I might have been a bit kind of what's the word, narrow in how I was talking about some of the work certainly that we did with the rail vehicle interface engineers. So whilst they were talking about technical with the engineers, they also had to have the conversations with the people who held the purse strings. So because the maintenance engineer would love to do the things that they want to do to fix their infrastructure, so we would have to get good at having different types of conversations with the commercial people, the sponsors, the asset owners, the ones who kind of had the budgets for the control period or whatever. So please don't get me wrong, it wasn't just a technical conversation. We were trying to avoid the angst, I suppose, of some of the contractual stuff that makes it a bit heated. It was trying to turn it into a thought, a listening kind of conversation from a technical perspective. But then when you've made that, you've identified what the issue is, then move over to the kind of the commercial conversation in terms of how do you kind of then fix that. In terms of attracting customers to the railway, yes, it's all about keeping those costs down, isn't it? So that you can make their tickets, even though they're all going to be the same price, which is the whole kind of driver from it. From a Great British Railways perspective, is having an easy way of buying your ticket, knowing how much it's going to cost, and it being something that compels you to take the train instead of your car or a plane. And that's where I think the good stuff that we've had from a privatized industry, i.e. innovation and investment, is going to be the things that we want to make sure we keep going forward, so that we can continue to reduce the costs of running our railway and make more of that kind of intelligent infrastructure and all those other great ideas and things that sometimes seem a bit difficult to do as an industry. There is, so Peter Flynn, you've got your hand up. Are you able to talk?
I hope so, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Peter.
Oh, good. Yeah, thank you very much. It's a very interesting presentation, Andrew, and I enjoyed listening to it. I had a question about career paths for engineers, particularly in the rail industry. And I think it's quite noticeable that most people like yourself have sort of started in the industry at quite a young age and continue to work your way through it and so on. But do you think the industry would benefit if it either brought in perhaps more engineers from outside, from with other experience, or encouraged engineers perhaps mid-career or whenever to go out and experience something different and perhaps come back again? What are your views on that?
Absolutely. So I've got to admit, I tried a couple of times, but I ended up staying in the rail industry. But I would definitely kind of say it's an industry where engineers can start at any point in their career. There are some very similar kind of sectors where it's almost like transferable in terms of its asset management, so power generation, some highways. They're all kind of engineering sectors where those skills are very transferable. And actually, to be honest, certainly I found in Network Rail that military engineers are fantastic engineers, because what they've learned as part of their training in the military organisation brings across great behaviours, which kind of added to the technical kind of knowledge and capability they have, works really well. So I'm hoping I'm becoming more of a rarity in terms of somebody whose whole career has been in the rail industry, and actually you've got people who are reaching out of the railway box, in fact, or coming into the railway box.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much. That was an interesting answer. And yes, I suppose it comes down to this sort of, we use this word diversity quite a lot, and it can mean an awful lot of things. But generally speaking, diversity of experience and so on is extremely valuable in my view, anyway. Thank you.
Absolutely. If anything, it brings new ideas, new ways of working that others have applied elsewhere. There's nobody else got their hands up in the virtual audience. Is there anything in the chat?
Well, I was going to ask a question. You very much stressed cost as what attracts the passenger, but I think engineers have got lots of other areas where they can actually make people either come back to the railways or come to the railways. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Sorry, I thought that was going to be a statement. Sorry, what was the question, Felix? What was the cost?
Well, you were stressing that as engineers, we just have to keep the cost down and people will come. But I think that's not quite the whole answer. What other things can the engineer do to make people use the railway and come back to the railway?
So it's the experience, very much in terms of, so access to kind of information, infotainment, the experience of the journey from a passenger perspective is all the other stuff that we can do, and also speed and getting there fast. So yeah, so again, sorry, you're right. Cost is sometimes front and center from a customer's or a passenger's initial kind of thoughts, but when they get on the train or the kind of the transport that they're on, they're very much thinking about the environment around them, and also obviously the how comfortable or safe they feel. So those are the areas where engineers absolutely play a part in it.
I was very much thinking of reliability.
Okay.
You
sorry, that was a given. Yes.
Well,
you get there on time. Yes. Yes. Okay. Good point. Yes. Malcolm.
Listening to Andrew's talk, what do you think are the key things that the engineers in Network Rail have got to do to overcome the perception or reality that they are the kings and everyone else has to toe their line?
I suppose I'm disappointed to hear you ask the question, because I don't think they're there in terms of what I'm seeing, I suppose, from the inside.
I'm thinking about it is,
Yeah.
maybe perception.
Okay.
But often, the old saying, perception is reality.
Okay. So I think what they're doing a lot at the moment is going to help them to get there as part of the whole. I suppose I'm trying not to use the in-house kind of terminology, but it's putting passengers first. It's regionalising of the kind of accountabilities within those areas. That to me is the bit that is going to help unlock that. So it's taken from a command and control organisation to something that is more local and regional. And the initial first parts of it to see that will be the operational side, so not the engineering side, because they're the ones who will get that direct interface and have those kind of pressures in terms of a reliable and safe railway. But I think the engineers will be very much behind them. And so the journey they're already on, I think, will take them there. It'll potentially be accelerated by Great British Railway. But it's very much about trying to think about it from the customer's perspective. So there is the whole putting passengers first campaign that Andrew Haines has brought when he took he accelerated, to be honest, when he brought it into Neville Rail. And that's the bit where I have seen some of that from the inside in terms of what that looks like. And from my perspective, so I've got design engineers who think they are so remote from the actual passenger, the customer, they really struggled or have struggled with it. But actually, the more and more you think about it and you take away all those different layers that you think are between you and that customer on the railway, the more and more you realize you can actually get closer to it. And when you think of it differently like that, you also start to behave it differently, I think. Wow. Richard.
Hi, yeah. Being a bit older than you, I did half of my time in traction and rolling stock, working for British Rail, and the other half as a privatised railway company. And two really important things we got with privatisation was actually you knew what was your responsibility and what was somebody else's responsibility. So when somebody accidentally relayed the East Coast Main Line narrow to gauge, and we had a lot of problems with hunting on our fleet, there was no doubt about it. No, oh, sorry, we've got it wrong, we'll have to relay it. Because it was Railtrack's responsibility to lay the track to the right gauge. And then secondly, we had the famous fleet of trains with the wrong type of snow. And one of the first things in my job was, oh, well, in the privatised world, we'll go bust if it snows. But because we would pay performance penalties under the performance regime, it took no trouble at all to convince the board to invest in overhauling traction motors so that they were snowproof. And those two things, the contractual relationship, so you know what somebody else is supposed to be doing, and the fact that you can monetize your failures in reliability, I think transformed the performance of rolling stock in privatisation. Do you think the way the Williams and the Hendys and not quite the Haynes are talking, that's all a load of rubbish? And my fear is that those two elements are going to be babies that get thrown out of the privatisation bathwater. Do you think I'm right? Or do you think I'm right to be afraid?
I think you're right. I think you're right to be wary of it. Yes, but I think that's what you and I should be making sure it doesn't happen. I think I think everyone's going to be having a part to play in shaping what this looks like. And so those who have got the memories and the learning from that history have got to be, I suppose, received, understood, heard, and be able to put it across in a positive way. Because I don't think I'm in a bar humbug world yet, but there is the right way to do that kind of stuff. But then there's also the new ideas and new thinking that needs to help to set some of the direction that tries to get where we're going, but make sure we don't forget about those lessons learned. So I think all kind of generations of kind of engineers and people within the rail industry should be helping to shape that. And that's probably why I think it's going to take some time to do as well, because we're not going to do it in a rush. They didn't say we'll do this in the next year or so. They said actually this will take 2, 3, 4 years to do. And that to me kind of represents some thinking and also some and the people that they brought, the organisations that they brought together to create that transformation team, I think are at least a good start in terms of the right people for that. I think there was another one down there.
Robin Grote from Department of Transport. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. Can you share a little bit of your thoughts about where the railway division of the Institution of Mechanical Engineers is strong and can influence the agenda over the next 12 months? What are the things we're really good at? Maybe what are the things we are less good at? Okay.
Yes. So the things that we're good at, or have been historically good at, is enabling that networking stuff to happen. So the railway division, as part of the IMechE, is probably one of the most active in terms of creating events such as seminars, conferences that allow people to come together and talk. Obviously, it's been a bit difficult over the last 18 months, 2 years, because we've gone virtual, but we didn't stop doing that. So we even held an annual luncheon in order to kind of maintain that kind of that thing that we're good at, but do it in a different way. So that's definitely an area where there's strength. Both from a railway division and an IMechE perspective. Where we're sometimes not as good, I suppose, is once we've had those conversations and we've helped to kind of shape some of the thinking in-house, as it were, it's how do we then get that message heard and understood out of house, for the people who are actually doing it, trying to put it together, whether they be government organizations, large kind of network rail, train operators type stuff. It's that how do you kind of continue that momentum that you created internally within the IMechE. And one of the things that I'm trying to do is do it in a almost like collaborative way with the other professional engineering institutions, because some of them have strengths in their own kind of ability to influence some of the stuff in the industry, in the organizations. And so we should work together or harness the kind of the strengths and gap areas that we've got between us, because we've now actually got a common problem, a common focus. And it's not a problem. What's the best thing that brings everybody together? Common problem. So we've got a common focus now. And I think that's going to be a great catalyst for us to kind of say, actually, do you think we should be talking like this or about this type of stuff? And I think the only answer is yes. Okay. I think what we could probably do is kind of say, end. I was almost going to say, put stuff in the chat afterwards, but I'm not going to go there.
I think, well, we didn't actually discuss beforehand who should how give the thanks for this talk, but it probably falls to me since I started it all. So an excellent presentation, and I now know what the boxes and the dots are. What's in the boxes, I think, is not just technology, it's people, and it's people and technology. It's the combination, otherwise it doesn't work. So I think that came across very, very nicely. And joining the dots is, again, people. And if you stop doing that, then the system will collapse. And interestingly, over the past 20 odd years, the industry has actually come from completely being separated to being quite close together in terms of discussion, doing things. And there is a risk that the Great British Railway will end up being British Railway where, oh no, you are the track engineer, you're making a mess of my trains. Or, I'm the train engineer, why is everybody horrible to me? It's not my fault that the trains break down all the time. And I think there is a risk when you have got a big united organization that people start to lose this point about responsibility, understanding where they're supposed to be, what they're supposed to do. And I think if we follow the lessons which James has given us, then I think we can probably overcome that in the longer term. So thank you very much indeed. The people who are at home or at work around the world will probably also think of you, but they can't clap. So I would like a decent clap from the audience here.